Dropping big facts, forbidden knowledge. Putting conscious on the map, forbidden knowledge. Always on the scene, forbidden knowledge. Took the pictures, those ain't memes, forbidden knowledge. What you wanna learn? What you wanna learn? What you wanna learn? Tell me what you...
I wanted to do something a little bit different from what people usually talk about when they talk about UFOs. When we tend to go back to, well, obviously some of the most important stories, which tend to have to do with military encounters, and you've all been interested in what happened to the Nimitz and the research that's going on with this and so on. And obviously those are very dramatic. They make the newspapers, they make the New York Times. My stories don't do that. I'm interested in the other 90%, which is more private, more one-on-one with witnesses. And, but the advantage is that it's not covered by national security. You don't need a clearance, or all you need to do is, but here's the key point. You need to gain the trust of the people who were there, because they were there and I wasn't. And I'm trying to deal with the situation, which may be a very traumatic situation to them. I've seen UFOs when I was a kid, so we have something in common. I still don't understand the experience, and I don't pretend to understand their experience. So that's where I come from. And most of the UFO phenomenon is really there. It's really in the field, in the countryside, in isolated farms somewhere, in the US, but also in France, in Russia, in Spain, in Latin America. And that's where I think research, at least the research that I can contribute, comes from there. And I like to sit at the kitchen table, and if I'm lucky, they bring me a cup of coffee, which in Brazil is extremely good. I highly recommend it. It will keep you focused. And we talk. And I don't go there with a questionnaire. I don't go there with all that. I try to listen. And I try to understand the extraordinary experience that they've had, and I try to understand how it has changed their life. Because what I saw did change my life. It made me more oriented to looking at the unknown, and to want to do science and to want to do research, which I continue to do. Now, speaking of that, you know, people talk today, people are excited today in research about two things, at least my colleagues in Silicon Valley and elsewhere. One is artificial intelligence, which is new, and the other one is going to the moon, which is new. Well, come on, you know, I'm old enough to remember doing a PhD in artificial intelligence, and Dr. Hynek was on my thesis committee at Northwestern in Chicago in 1967. So yeah, it's new. The main thing that's new is that now we have lots of memory, and it's cheap, and we have these big computers that can take, quote, big data, whatever that means today. In those days, we had short memory. It was very expensive. It was hard to do. It was pioneering work. But artificial intelligence is already here. It's in your car. It's in every airplane. It's in a lot of things we use every day. It's in medical equipment. It's in image processing. And it is in your cell phone. Because if you think the camera in your cell phone is like a normal camera, you're wrong. I mean, it is a very sophisticated piece of, essentially, of software. There is no hardware. It's just a little bit of plastic. And it does perfect pictures. The other thing that's exciting is going back to the moon. I mean, 50 years ago, I remember sitting in my living room with my kids and my wife and watching people land on the moon. And I mean, what happened? You know, we never got back. And now we are going to build a rocket that maybe will get us there again in the next few years, except that it's 5 years behind schedule already and so on. I mean, come on, I mean, what happened? So I want to talk about cases that I'm looking at now that for which I have a passion, because they are different from what's in the books, including my books. And they open some perspectives that are both exciting and very uncomfortable. But before, so I'll mention 5 cases, 3 in Brazil and 2 in France that are contemporary in the last few years. But before that, I want to go back to artificial intelligence. That, you know, and that's probably the last thing you want to have is a course on artificial intelligence 1 hour after lunch in a dark room. But I'll try to make it, you'll see, it's going to be okay. I have to master this computer first. The artificial intelligence means many things to many people. It's already in image processing, of course, and there are many areas where it's going to be coming in. And the reason people are excited is that it's now going to touch our lives in a visible way, including our jobs. It's going to change the job structures and so on. But we've known how to do it for a long time, many of those things, and you'll notice the date, 1985. This is a system I developed for my own use to screen UFO cases. So last night with Paul Hynek, we were talking about the Air Force and why the Air Force wanted to get out of UFOs. There were several reasons, many of which were the right reasons. One of the obvious ones is that it wasn't their mission to do scientific research, and they made it very clear that they had more important things to do. Another problem for them in 1952, at the time of the Robertson panel and all of that, when they wanted to get out of it, was that there were so many reports that it saturated the communication lines of the Air Force, which in 1952 were teletypes. And it doesn't take very much to saturate a network of teletypes, but those were the teletypes that were watching for a potential Soviet attack. And they were linking NORAD with, you know, the Northern Tier and all the radars around the US. And now that network was saturated with people reporting UFOs, 200 cases a day. So they obviously needed to, in their mind, re-educate the public. And they used Dr. Hynek, of course, and other scientists to do that, to try to eliminate the cases that really didn't have to do with something significant for them. Well, at that point, I proposed that artificial intelligence could do that. It couldn't explain those cases, but it could screen them, because there are patterns that you recognize, and many of the people calling in were describing things that, you know, an astronomer would understand. For example, when the moon rises through a layer of fog on the horizon, it doesn't look like the moon at all. It's much bigger than the moon because of the diffraction. Also, it's surrounded with a glow, and it actually looks like a disk that's rising and coming towards you. So, you know, a computer can understand that and can ask the right questions. So I developed for my own use a very simple artificial intelligence system, and I'd just like to show you, to take you through some of the steps to, essentially what I want to do is not to teach anything, but I want to demystify this big, wonderful, complicated thing called artificial intelligence. So this is not a robot. This is simply a piece of software that will work with you in a dialogue with you and with the person reporting something to try to screen the obvious things that you can recognize and to prioritize the cases that are really important to investigate. Usually, MUFON today, or APRO, or NICAP in the old days, or the Air Force, when people reported something, they would send them a questionnaire to fill out. Questionnaires are horrible. Most people would just throw them into the garbage and never bother to reply. The witnesses hate filling them out, so you lose the best reports. Because the best reports are going to be complicated, and people are not going to go through 5 pages of questions. They also reflect what you already know. The characteristics, they didn't make a sound, how bright was the light, was it blue or red, was it, Those are the things you expect. UFO phenomenon doesn't do that. It does things that you don't expect, and that's what I want to get to. They are full of contradictions. For example, the person designing the questionnaire has no idea about your situation. So it will ask, did you see a shadow? Well, you just told him it was midnight. I mean, there is no shadow at midnight. So it's a stupid question. So you have to go through all these stupid things. We all know about questionnaires because we get them every day from a number of people. They try to be very precise. So, was it 20 feet or 22 feet? Well, you have no idea. I mean, this thing showed up and you were, stunned by what you saw. You didn't go there, to measure it with a tape measure. They create boxes that try to structure what happened. What happened first, what happened second. Nobody asked what happened before. Okay. One of the questions I always ask a witness is, okay, so you saw this at 7 p.m. What were you doing at 3 p.m.? And then you get something very, very interesting, because very often there were preparatory situations before, either in the life of the witness, or in their state of mind, or in the phenomenon outside. And nobody bothers to look at that. They take hours to transcribe, to process, if you've ever tried to fill out one of those. And they, as an investigator or as a researcher, it takes hours for me to take that and rewrite it into a computer and so on. It's irrelevant. And they miss the critical data. Why didn't the dog bark in the night? That's the obvious thing. Artificial intelligence can help with that, and I'd like to show you how it can work in a very simple set of software tools. And it will guide your analysis. So this system is called a rule-based expert system. We're going to put the expertise into the computer, and the computer will take us through that in a way that branches off depending on what we already know. And there could be contradictions, and that's all right. The system will deal with the contradictions that's why it's intelligent, okay? So here you've entered the fact that the shape was diffused. It was at night. The weather was overcast, and the thing was moving rapidly. Well, that's an unknown. It's certainly unidentified. It's not obvious. But maybe you should call the next town 5 miles away and ask if they had a premiere of a new movie, because sometimes people use projectors to call attention to, a movie house opening up or a big concert, and maybe there's a light there that's shining on the clouds. And it can make 90-degree turns at high speed because it's just an image projected on clouds. Well, you're sitting there 5 miles away, you have no idea this is going on, but this is something that you find in the Air Force files, that people reported this shape that was And this object that was moving it can be a very clear sphere or oval playing through the clouds and jumping around. You may not know that it's midnight and you have an overcast above you. So the system isn't solving any problems here, but it's just saying, hey, did you think of that it could be a searchlight somewhere in the neighborhood? Those searchlights can shine a light 10 miles away. So that's a very simple example, but the system has to be smart enough to ask those questions in the right way, and that's because there is a rule behind it in memory that says this is what searchlights look like at night on an overcast. The system will ask you questions. The witness is describing a number of things. The system will ask you, well, find out if there was an inversion of temperature at the time. And, call the weather station or look up the tables. It will also engage you in dialogue so you can challenge the analysis of the system itself. Here it says, you can ask, why is the computer asking me to determine if there was a storm in the weather pattern? Well, the system answers, I need that to determine whether there could have been an electromagnetic phenomenon, which is another branch of the possible explanations. And it explains why it's asking that. It's a very polite computer that says, you told me there was a diffuse shape. Therefore, if there is a storm, and if you ask the person about the light, and the light is a blue-white light, then you should look into the possibility that there was an electromagnetic phenomenon there, like ball lightning. A good system should explain what it does. This is not a mysterious robot that's going to say, no, Jacques, it's a system that's friendly to you and that explain what it does. So say, why is it important to determine if there was an inversion of the weather? And it says it's needed to determine whether there could have been a mirage. Since you tell me it's daylight, and if there is a weather inversion, and if the temperature is higher than 80 degrees, then if there is a diffuse shape, then you should look into the possibility these people saw a mirage. So what do we mean by a rule? Well, the rule is something we're going to enter into the computer, and the computer will keep learning as we find new things, and the rule will have a number of statements that will lead to a situation. The rules can be non-exclusive, they can be very complex, and you'll end up with something like 200 different rules that you wouldn't normally remember, when you're designing a questionnaire. And the rules can be added as the system learns, and then the system will build an internal model that could become very complicated, and it will guide you through that. And then it will suggest tentative conclusions. Now, if the Air Force had something like this in 1952, they could have filtered 200 cases a day without any problem. You could have a system like that on the phone. You could have it on email, obviously, and on any of the modern systems on the internet. So that's just one. Just wanted to preface what I'm going to say later with this, because I wanted to demystify the idea of using the modern tools of software to help in what we're doing, because we're going to need a lot of help. We're going to need a lot of help because the cases are complex. The cases that go through the screening, the cases that are not the moon, and not a mirage, and not a projector, and so on, but the real cases of people who've had real experiences that can be traumatic. And we haven't spoken too much about this at conferences like this. We tend to think of aliens like the aliens in the lobby, who are, a little bit scary, but they are or very scary, but they are, turn out to be friendly or inquisitive or, well, that's not the general situation. The general situation ranges from that to cases that are crisis cases, and I'd like to take you through a few of those. By the way, in all the cases I'm going to mention, I went there, in some cases several times, and I met with the witnesses and I interviewed the witnesses myself with other people who came with me. Case in 1975 in Brazil. I've gone to Brazil 4 times so far. I hope to go back. In August 2015, I traveled there to the northeast region of Brazil, which is not a jungle. I mean, it's not the Amazon. The Amazon is to the east. This is called the northeast, but it's really the region about around Fortaleza. It's fairly close to the equator, so it gets very hot. And I went there with a friend of mine who is a researcher in parapsychology. He's an architect, an American architect. He built hospitals and houses in Brazil for several years under an exchange program with Brazil. He was a student of Frank Lloyd Wright, a very distinguished architect, married a Brazilian woman, speaks Portuguese fluently, has a Brazilian daughter. Now he's back in the US, and we continue to research Brazil together. But he knows the territory, he knows the language, and he knows the people, which I don't. We spent several weeks there traveling in that region that I'll show you. And we reviewed about a dozen cases of close encounters in an area going from Fortaleza to Cabral and Quixara in the south. And we tracked down witnesses from an old series of cases that mostly in Brazil had been forgotten, but were still in the database, and we wanted to go back and reinvestigate them and see what had happened since then. And this is the setting. So the town of Fortaleza is it's a large city of over 4 million people. So these are not little villages in the jungle, okay? I mean, that idea of Brazil, you have to dispel. Brazil is a heavily populated country. It's the size of Western Europe. And it's served by a major airport. It's a 7-hour flight from Miami. But with the good coffee, it helps. What they call the interior, they say, oh, that's the interior. Well, what they call the interior of Brazil is this enormous region, primarily agriculture, well served by roads and buses and trains and so on, modern communications, although somewhat primitive by the standards of this magnificent hotel, but there is you're not in the forest, there are no bad snakes biting you and so on. It's not the Amazon. And very quickly, you have to adjust to the culture. This is an intensely sophisticated, modern, spiritually complex culture, 80% Catholic, which means people will go to Mass in the morning, but in the afternoon they go to an Umbanda ceremony, and the symbols are somewhat similar. And for example, there are priestesses and there are goddesses in Umbanda that correspond to the image we have of Mary. And so the two cultures interpenetrate peacefully. But these are pictures I took in Fortaleza. You can see modern buildings, and then you can see shops like these where you can shop for essentially for what we would think of as voodoo dolls, okay, and voodoo statues. But voodoo has many, many different declinations, many different branches. The ones that are in Latin America, and especially in Brazil, have their own rules and their own rituals. So it's complex. And you have to know that going in, very often when you go into someone's house, there will be an altar there, and that altar will indicate the spiritual situation there, and what people know and what people believe, and their particular spiritual orientation. Caso Antonio, this took place in November 75. So those are pictures that I took of the, yes, these are pictures that I took of the area. It's a spectacular region with these huge granite formation and basalt and so on. Very rich plantation, palm trees, and it's very cultivated, very rich. And the case happened on you can see the house there. That house is part of that particular farm. Antonio was working. Antonio was the father. He was working on the property behind these bushes. It's a picture I took from that fence. And two of his children, who were about 11 years old, came to fetch him because he was late for lunch. They saw a bright white sphere of light with two beams, a white beam and a red beam, over the area where their father had been working. And they went there and they found his body. And they, of course, called people and brought his body back to their house. We located some of his family, including this woman, Mary Jose, who had married one of his sons. Of course, this was in 1975. Now we're there, many years later. But everybody remembered the incident, remembered the details, showed us pictures of the family at the time. But only the two little kids had seen the object itself. So we didn't have much to go on, but we had the detail of the injuries. And in the interior of Brazil in 1975, it's very, very hot. Nobody's going to do an autopsy. I mean, that body was buried very quickly. But the details were gathered about what the body presented. Part of the head was burned black. There was missing flesh on the forehead. There was a hole on the back of his neck with some dried blood. The right shirt collar was burnt and fused, was polyester, that the fibers fused. He had a knife. Everybody has a knife in the country that was found some distance away from the body. Both arms and feet were burned, and he had deep sunburns on the cheek. The shoes were on the ground some distance away, and there was no autopsy. This is not your usual UFO case, and we had relatively little information to go on, except that this doctor's account was clear. I mean, this was what was filed when they buried the body. That case was practically unknown in Brazil, completely unknown in the United States, has never been in any books, has never been reported, or no documentary about it. And by the way, I don't travel with a television, with a video camera or anything. I will take notes on paper, but I don't want to be obtrusive when I'm talking to witnesses, especially when it's a family that's remembering a tragic event like this one. I want to be with them, and I want to listen. I want to listen carefully. And I have people with me who can translate Portuguese and translate the different dialects of Portuguese, because Brazil is very, very big, and the meaning of words changes from one region to another. So we were tracking another case, and we told the people that we had been doing research on the Antonio case, and they said, oh, you know, his nephew is still around. So we took a couple of hours to go track the nephew, who is the fellow with the red shirt here with me. And Francisco is his name, and he confirmed essentially the details, that the time was 1 p.m., that the father had not come back for lunch, and that he confirmed the appearance of the body. Well, what do you do with a case like this? This is not your, you know, friendly, we're going to contact the aliens and there will be peace on earth forever. And this is not it, okay? Don't ask me why would somebody come if there are extraterrestrials. Why would somebody come from the other end of the galaxy to kill this poor guy who really hasn't done anything? He's just, you know, tending his farm. Why him? Why not something else? Why deploy this kind of thing, which obviously is a very, very effective weapon? Is it a side effect of something else, or is it intentional? If it's intentional, you know, what does it mean? Because we also have cases where people have been healed of illnesses, of problems, health problems that they had by being in proximity with a UFO. And then we have cases where people didn't suffer anything. I mean, the movie you're going to see tonight is a case that was investigated in Argentina, with absolutely a remarkable movie that I recommend, where a 12-year-old kid was going, his father sent him to gather the herd in the back of a farm, and he was confronted with an extraordinary phenomenon. He was not abducted. He, being a country kid, was inquisitive and quick. He went into the object and confronted the creatures, the entities that were there, and he was not harmed. It certainly changed his life, as you'll see in the movie, but he was not harmed by this. His horse went blind, and the horse died within a week. The kid didn't have anything. We don't understand this. We don't have enough data about the medical impact. What data we have has been gathered by physiologists who are looking for impact and injuries. They didn't look at the other half of the database, which has to do with situations where people were healed by the experience of being close to a UFO. But in the case that I just showed you, there was instant confrontation and death. And death that's, you know, obviously the result of pretty complex energy effects on the body. And I want to reassure you, I see some people are leaving. My other 4 cases are not like that. Okay, this was, but we cannot. There are in the files about 12 cases of people dying in, you know, pretty radical conditions in the presence of a UFO, in close encounter cases with UFOs. Caso Tiziana, this is 2004. As you can see, it's in another region in the neighborhood of Fortaleza. It's a semi-rural area, not far from Fortaleza. Now, you have to have an idea of distances. You know, to go to some of these cases that are nearby. Nearby in Brazil means you get into your car and you drive for 3 hours. Okay, I mean, this is okay. This is. The witness was a pregnant woman whom I met, was close to delivery. And one night she saw a very bright light behind the window. And she and her husband subsequently discovered a mark on her skin, on her abdomen. which was why they reported the incident, because they were afraid that it had to do with the baby, it had to do with the delivery, and obviously they were, sensitive to anything that would mark her body. So this was a mark. Right here. It's a round mark. It didn't hurt, but it was definitely there, and it lasted about 10 days to 2 weeks. The baby was born a week later, and the baby had the same mark. So I'm very interested in that because for two reasons. First, there was a prior history. When she was a little girl, Tiziana lived in a country property they call a sítio in Portuguese, and she used to walk around in the countryside with her maid. And once there was a big light that came close to them, they just call it a light. And it scared them, it tended to chase them, and they ran into the house and closed the door. And everything came back to normal that day, but they continued to see lights around the property. Later, I will come back to this, to the idea of skin marks, because we've done research, and we're still doing research, on a number of cases, hundreds of cases, in the United States, in France, in Russia, in other parts of Europe, and so on, where people, typically they take a shower, and when they come out of the shower, they see something on their skin, usually on the arms and the upper body, not on the face, sometimes on the hip, like this woman. And the person, usually it's a woman. We have a few cases with men, but in at least 200 cases I know, there were only 2 or 3 cases with men. The rest of it were women, for reasons we don't understand. And their husband will say, oh, what's this on your arm? You didn't have that pattern before. And it's usually a round pattern with sometimes some radii, and I'll show you, I'll talk more about that later, because there is a case like this in France that I want to get to. Let me talk about the third Brazilian case that we looked at. The case of Manuel, 1999, so we're coming closer to the present. This is, again, a good 3 hours drive from, or a couple of hours drive from Fortaleza. He was 47 years old at the time, living in a country estate, about an hour outside Fortaleza, forgive me. And there was a family event, there was a big birthday bash, the whole family was there was food and so on. And then in the middle of the night, he got up and walked outside and was apparently abducted. He said he was lifted by a beam of light and lost 4 hours. So and was left unconscious on the ground. So people looked for him the next morning, and at noon they found him unconscious. He had been dropped 50 meters away from where he had been standing. And these pictures were taken by the doctor. They took him to a doctor who took film and pictures to document the case, because the doctor couldn't figure out what had happened to this patient. He had a cut over the right eye. He was bleeding. He had a centavo, a 10-cent coin in his left hand. He used to have a necklace. The necklace was no longer there. It was in his right hand. And the doctor in São Paulo filmed him and interviewed him. He also had cuts, multiple cuts, that had been cauterized around the left side of his chest. He had a hole in his left hand that was painful, took a long time to heal, with fluid exuding from the wound. He felt drained of energy. And again, you'll find some of these things in the movie tonight with the case that we've been tracking that we will be presenting. He felt drained of energy, which is a common experience with people in close encounter cases around the world. People will just fall asleep and sleep for 20 hours and be unable to go to work the next day and so on. And it can be, and again, we don't understand that. We don't understand why it would have that effect. We don't know of any radiation, in quotes, that does it. And he certainly didn't understand what happened to his necklace and the coin and so on. This was just completely bizarre to him. The incisions had been stitched and cauterized. Now, remember, he was only gone for a few hours. And obviously, this was superficial, but why did that happen? I mean, it doesn't relate to anything. It's absurd. He's now retired. I met him. I went to his house. I asked him, what did you do? What was your business? He said he was a driver for a chauffeur service in the area all his life. He remembered the sensation of being lifted and then being dropped. And now, of all things, what he really wants to do is to contact them. Now, this is somebody, and again, you'll find this contradiction in people, even in people who've been scared to death or people who've been hurt. But it becomes the most important thing in their lives. It's a mystery that they need resolution, they need closure. And one of the things that I've learned to do as an investigator in those cases is they see me, rightly or wrongly, as somebody who can bring some measure of closure. Because I've had an experience, certainly not as traumatic as that, but it's an experience that I still carry with me, for which I don't have an explanation. So that creates some common ground, and I'm certainly willing to listen to anything they tell me and give them the space to remember more and to come to deal with it. So again, the kitchen. The kitchen is always the center of that kind of investigation. You don't want to take them to the police station and have them fill out a form. Here he is with his wife. He's Catholic. He's now 69. He has a grandson in the home. His health has been good. I said, well, what happened to you since then? He said, well, I still have the cuts. He showed me the cuts. But they don't hurt. He has no idea why this happened. He doesn't feel, and I asked his wife, do you think your husband changed? Did his personality change as a result of this? Did it change your, And she said no, and he said no, that he didn't feel it had changed him. But the scars are still visible, and he has dreams now of beings who come to him at night and take him through the wall. I met Whitley Strieber is here. If you've read his, extraordinary books, Whitley has had a number of experiences, including entities coming into his house and sometimes, taking him away and so on. So it's an experience that people have had in many countries, in many cultures. And when you think about it, I was born in France, and I still go back to France regularly for business. I know the French culture is not like the American culture. I mean, you have a car in France, but it's not quite the same thing as having a car in California, okay? You watch television, but French television is very different from American television. So there are many, many differences in the cultures. But with UFOs, there are some constant things that are the same, including silly little details that are exactly the same in Brazil, in Argentina, in Russia, in France, and in the US. So how often do you find something that is a constant, it's a puzzle, but it's also a constant phenomenon in all these different cultures. So let's talk about France. And those are recent cases, both of which I'm still investigating. I tend to stay in contact with the witnesses when they let me over months or years to see what changes, to understand the changes in their lives, to see if they have to do with their experience or if it just went away, it was just one-time thing. And as you'll see, in most cases, it tends to be something that continues to carry at least the images and the interest and the awakening throughout the rest of their lives. So, first case happened in this building, which is a modern, tall building in an old suburb of Paris, from which you can see very far into the countryside from these balconies. Middle-aged woman, very dynamic, professional in business. She was attending a meeting of some friends of mine who have a UFO discussion and research group in Paris. And she had come home fairly late at night, and she was sort of getting ready to go to bed, and she saw a light outside her window, outside one of these balconies. And the light was, about 2 meters high, was an oval, vertical oval, was yellow-orange, very bright, with something like fire inside and some sort of structure. So it was complicated. It wasn't a disk. It didn't look like a technical thing, but it was very definite. It wasn't fuzzy at all. It was very definite, egg-shaped, tall thing. And it drifted, what she thought, drifted just outside her balcony, slowly. She had a camera, a cheap camera, not a digital camera. And I much rather have a non-digital camera than a digital one, because the digital cameras are full of computers and software that changes, trying to make the image pleasant to you. So they will change the scenery, they will change things around to highlight the things that have to be in contrast for you to like the picture of your kid or your sister or whatever. And the old cameras with ordinary Kodak film just give you what was there. And it's a lot easier, a lot more interesting to study it, because you can go in the lab, you can go layer by layer in the different colors of the emulsion, and so you can do all that. With a digital camera, all you have is a bunch of bits. So all you have is a database, essentially. But it looks good. So my friend, I should give credit to the people who did the investigation before me, Gérard Deforge, and there was a report to the gendarmerie, because she was a good citizen. She thought this should be recorded somewhere, even though there was no crime committed. And the 2 photographs that she took showed nothing. So, okay, when I met her, the film had not been developed. She had the camera with her. So I said, well, where are you going to develop it? And she said, well, there is a shop that does 24-hour, turnaround. And I said, well, tell them not to cut the film, Because there will be some skeptic who will say, she took a picture from something else, and then she put it in the deck of the cat images and so on, and you were fooled by this hoax. So I wanted to have the complete film. So they did that, and we got the complete film, and those 2 pictures had been taken, like she said, and they showed nothing. So I asked if I could take the camera, and it's a camera you throw away, so it was easy for me to save it and the film, and we put it in an envelope, and everybody signed on the envelope to authenticate that this actually came from that case, and I took it back to San Francisco, and I called Douglas Trumbull. Douglas Trumbull is the award well-known cinematographer and special effects specialist from Close Encounters, where he worked on Close Encounters, and I met him at that time. But he also worked on Blade Runner. He worked on 2001. I mean, he's the great special effects man, and very interested in UFOs. And he had told me, if you ever have a case that involves photography, let me know and we'll look at it together. So he came over with a scanner, with a high resolution scanner, and we scanned those 2 pictures. There is something on those 2 pictures, but it's not the UFO. She took a picture, very, very faint lights in the countryside that you can see on the film. It's in the emulsion. There is an image. The camera functioned normally. It was at night. It was near midnight. There was no other light around, but there were a couple of cars on the expressway that goes into Paris, and you could see the headlights. I mean, she had taken 2 pictures, and the pictures, the camera did register the 2 pictures of what was there, which was the French countryside at night. But there was no UFO. My friends in France, Venturini and again Deforge, who are close friends of mine there, sat down with her and with an artist to do a reconstruction of what she had seen. And these are 2 different images she did on different days of what she remembered. You can see they are very close. There is a structure to the object. And inside there is this, what she described as a kind of fire. Well, there are not many cases like that. It doesn't fall into one of the patterns that we know and love of a disk with a dome, or all the pictures that you see outside here. This is different. And we don't know why it was there. I went back, and it's a suburb of Paris. It's relatively tough, and there were people milling around, and a bunch of kids. And I approached them, and I asked everybody I could if they had seen something like that. They laughed at me at first, but I told them, no, this is serious. We're doing research, and do you know of anybody having seen this? And they didn't. So I couldn't come up with corroborating witnesses. But those unique cases are important too, because the skeptics always ask, well, we have all these pictures of everything, cars tumbling up and down, and crimes and things happening all over the place, where somebody was there with a cell phone, took the picture, pictures of riot, of police in riot situations and so on. We have all of that, but we don't have many pictures of UFOs that are legitimate. Well, in this particular case, we have a reliable witness with a camera, who took 2 pictures, the camera took the 2 pictures, and there's nothing there. But I believe that she saw this. There is no question in my mind that she saw this. Her life since then has been normal. So if you want details of the analysis, this was Douglas Trumbull had a Nikon scanner connected to a MacBook Pro. The images were scanned at very high pixel resolution, 8-bit depth. So, you know, anything that was in that emulsion showed up, was in the database. It was a 65 megabyte image, each one, after scanning. And then it was analyzed with Photoshop, advanced features of Photoshop. And the frames that corresponded to the witness describing her actions were exposed, and there was only a faint street light, a series of street lights, and those cars in the background.
Dropping big facts, forbidden knowledge. Putting conscious on the map, forbidden knowledge. Always on the scene, forbidden knowledge. Took the pictures, those ain't memes,